Howdy folks. We can improve the productivity of many depleted soils for centuries to come when we add biochar made from waste wood. This short introduction will show you how you can start. My name is Walton Sumner. I'm a retired family physician, and I founded Argillic Horizon as a research and education nonprofit to work on food security and quality. Biochar is a tool in that work. Biochar is nearly pure carbon made from waste wood. It can be part of a program to regenerate depleted and marginal soils, ultimately enabling plants to capture more energy from the local fusion reactor. Biochar should persist in the soil for centuries. Biochar and charcoal both result from heating wood with limited air, but they are very different products. Charcoal is heated to a lower temperature, leaving a lot of oils that make it a good cooking fuel, but not initially very effective at binding other nutrients in soil. Biochar is heated to temperatures well above 300 degrees Celsius and should have little or no oil left. It feels cleaner, sounds more like glass, and is easier to remove from your skin compared to charcoal. This anaerobic heating process transforms materials made of cellulose and lignin, which are about 50% carbon, to nearly pure carbon structures. The carbon structures are mostly sheets of dozens or scores of contiguous aromatic rings. Remember that aromatic rings are flat, with electron clouds above and below the plane of the carbon bonds. This is biologically hard to attack. No natural nutrient source for plants, fungi, or bacteria has that structure. However, there are molecules and ions that the electron cloud will attract, and that layer in turn may attract a complementary layer of ions. This makes biochar useful in water filters, chemical cleanups, fertilizer retention, and regenerative soil management. The simplest way to collect biochar is to sift it from the ashes left by open fires. An open fire typically creates some embers that get entombed in ashes, restricting airflow. Although the embers reach 500 degrees C or more, they stop burning if access to air is completely blocked. When the fire cools, you have biochar and ashes, although the biochar yield is a very small fraction of the wood burned. You can massively improve the biochar yield by building a fire and then quenching the embers when the fire settles into a bed of hot glowing coals. This will work at every scale from a hibachi grill to a massive bonfire. As soon as you can approach the glowing coals, you can collect them in an appropriate sized scoop and mix them into water. Alternatively, you can pour water over the burning embers. If the fire is on the ground and you pour water over it, you're going to wash the ash and a lot of fine biochar into the ground. That is no problem if you build your fire over a future garden plot, but otherwise it's an avoidable waste. To capture the ash and biochar bits from a fire on the ground or in a container, just scoop the glowing embers into a bucket or tub of water. Ash will quickly settle, while microscopic char will stay suspended in the water for minutes to hours. Larger biochar chunks generally float. One variation on the open fire technique is to build it on top of a grate over tubs of water. As fuel burns and gets jostled by fuel additions, embers will fall through the grate into the water. One big benefit of this design is that it will burn through almost any amount of green or wet wood. Another is that really long limbs and trunks do not have to be cut to fit. Flame-capped kilns are more efficient than open fires, while remaining pretty simple. A flame-capped kiln limits the amount of air entering the base of a pile of fuel, but allows unrestricted air access at the top of the burning pile. One caveat is that the fuel needs to be dry, really dry, especially at the start. Moist fuel added to a hot kiln will make a smoky mess for several minutes, and moist fuel in a cold kiln will not start at all. Most backyard charcoal grills are easily converted to small flame-capped kilns simply by removing all grates and closing any lower vents. Build a pile of woody fuel and light it on top, and soon the burning pile will settle to glowing embers. You can feed the fire from the top as it burns. If a small kiln is getting full or embers start turning to ash, you can scoop embers into water and add more fuel to the kiln. You can convert an endless number of dry pine cones or sweet gum balls to biochar using a backyard grill and a 5-gallon bucket. Acorns, nuts, and other viable seeds are not so good. They usually contain enough protein to release nitrogen oxides and sulfur oxides, which is suboptimal. Killing the seeds with heat and then composting them is a better use. It's easy to make a flame-capped kiln from a closed drum using an angle grinder with a cutting disc. Here I have cut a large opening in the side of a 55-gallon drum, then laid the drum on the opposite side. Fill it with fuel, light it on top, and add fuel until the drum is full of glowing embers. The kiln routinely reaches 500 degrees. When it is full, let it burn for another hour, then use a shovel to scoop the embers from the kiln into water. It has two shortcomings. First, all the fuel has to fit through a 3-foot opening. Second, it does not handle wet wood very well at all. For a serious scale flame-capped kiln, Wilson Biochar offers a portable, double-walled, 3-foot high, 6-foot diameter steel ring of fire. The ring of fire is designed to consume forest slash left by logging operations. I am fortunate to have 2 of these. With 2 kilns bolted together using a few new holes in the heat shields, you can make a capsule shape that is about 8 feet across and 15 feet long. It's a lot like other flame-capped kilns, but big. It will take a 20-foot tall tree in one toss. It is much too big to manually scoop embers from the assembled kiln. You have to at least partially disassemble the kiln to start quenching. Once it has a hot bed of coals, it can take moist wood. The 8 by 15 by 3-foot kiln has a nearly 12 cubic yard capacity. A typical brush pile won't come close to filling it with biochar. The flame-capped kilns mainly take brush and small debris as feedstock. You do not want fine debris in these kilns. Sealed kilns work well with smaller feedstock like sawdust or chaff. A sealed kiln is heated from the outside and allows no air to enter, but it does allow wood gas to leave. This is called pyrolysis. The debris does not burn at all, it just decomposes in fiery heat, emitting wood gas and leaving mostly carbon. The kiln is not really sealed, but it prevents air from mixing with the feedstock, and it prevents the feedstock from falling to the ground. Ideally, it channels wood gas into the fire that is heating the kiln. Obviously, a genuinely sealed container in a fire is likely to fail in some unpleasant way, so you want to avoid that. The simplest way to make a sealed kiln is to fill an empty steel food can with sawdust or other fine debris, set the lid over the debris, stand the covered can on a non-flammable surface, and build a wood fire around it. Eventually, you will see flames dancing around the lid. Those flames will disappear when the pyrolysis is done or the fire cools. It might take more than one cooking fire to complete the pyrolysis. Fine debris in Dutch ovens, iron humidifying kettles, and partially capped pipes will pyrolyze in open fires, wood stoves, and flame-capped kilns. There are much larger sealed kilns for industrial biochar production, and they work about the same way. A company called Biochar Now manages very elaborate kilns that will pyrolyze bigger things like shredded tree trunks, forest slash, railroad ties, pallets, or even windmill blades, in tightly controlled 8 to 10 hour burns. A little more than a ton of wood feedstock produces 500 to 600 pounds of very high carbon biochar that is remarkably adept at absorbing cations, anions, and apparently even PFAS, the polyfluoroalkylated substances, or forever chemicals. These kilns use a 14-hour anaerobic cooling period rather than water quenching after a burn. There is an effort underway to extract wood gas from these kilns to run an electric turbine, and the biochar potentially could feed coal-fired electric plant. I should disclose that I am investing time and resources in biochar now because I think that they can save the world with decentralized soil regeneration and energy production. The main thing to remember when using biochar on a farm, in a garden, or in potting media is that biochar is not fertilizer. Biochar can hold fertilizer and water and a film of beneficial microbes. If you add too much raw biochar to soil, it may bind enough nitrogen to impair plant growth for a few years. This is bad. If you instead add biochar to an active compost pile, it will get loaded with all sorts of nutrients from the compost and water and become home to a thriving community of microbes. This is good. You can also load biochar with waste from animals, including us, but it still needs to be composted for at least a few weeks, possibly after sterilizing. Concentrated waste is hard on a lot of plants, even when adsorbed to biochar. One handy way to load biochar is to put it under straw in a barn or pen. Heavy animals will crush it, and all animals will drop excrement on it. It will reduce odors and runoff, and can be scooped up for composting at regular intervals. Another thing to remember is that biochar changes over time. It weathers. It oxidizes around the edges, which seems to be useful in most reports. A pile of biochar that has been officially certified in accordance with the International Biochar Initiative policies for labeling commercial products has to be re-evaluated if it gets wet in the rain. Most biochar is alkaline at first, but this could change with oxidation and rinsing. The last big thing to remember about biochar is that the dust is not good for people or animals to breathe. Think black lung disease. Damp biochar is not dusty, so composted material and bedding should not be a problem. Raw, dry biochar needs to be handled gingerly until it gets moist enough to prevent dust clouds. You can add up to 5 to 10% by weight of loaded composted biochar to the top 6 or 8 inches of soil till, and then plant into that soil. At the low end, that's something like 100,000 pounds per acre, which would be a lot more than you are likely to make in your first decade of manual effort. But you can fully treat one raised bed at a time, or annually add a fraction of a percent to larger fields almost indefinitely. If you feel compelled to add a sizable amount of raw biochar to a raised bed or a pot, be sure to cover or mix it with a thicker layer of compost, worm castings, or something like that to load it with nutrients before plant roots reach it. For no-till plots, fine biochar can be loaded, optionally composted, and then top-dressed in a thin layer, no more than ½ inch per year. The black biochar may warm the soil relatively quickly and get too dry to support a microbe community unless it is covered with mulch. Usually you would cover it with mulch. In potting media, biochar can replace a lot of peat, perlite, and vermiculite with little or no loss in apparent fertility. For instance, you can typically combine 2 parts of a commercial potting mix with 1 part sifted biochar and 1 part sifted compost to get a mix that performs about as well as the original commercial mix. One advantage here is that half of the mix is produced locally. We are working on methods where compost and biochar comprise even more of a potting mix, but trade-offs begin to emerge and make general statements more tenuous. That's a brief overview of biochar for resilient gardens and farms. It takes a little time and only simple procedures to make small amounts from woody debris, including crop debris, heated with limited air access. Creating biochar is a great way to dispose of brush piles. Large batches require more tools or planning. Biochar is not fertilizer, but it can soak up nutrients from waste or compost and get colonized with beneficial microbes in a compost pile. It holds nutrients, water, and microbes in the soil while allowing plants to get what they need. You can slowly work towards getting 5 to 10% carbon in your soil. Thanks for listening.